This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Rocking and rolling into 2025. I know everybody has got a little something going on. You know, we just fresh off of NBA Rivals Week. And then, you know, as well, too, man, we're right up on the precipice of NBA All-Star Weekend, NBA trade deadline. A lot of stuff happening, a lot of chitter chatter going on in some spaces and some teams and organizations. And we're all here for it, man. Loving every single moment of it. We roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my man, Mr. Warrenshaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. What's good, man? I'm still on location, but, you know, the show must go on.
The show must always go on, and you are a gentleman and a scholar for your dedication to the Baseline NBA podcast. Always great to be here with you, brother. You know, your favorite week, Rivals Week, is now concluded.
Yeah, man.
And as you allude to, yeah, we're about to march on into some other content, man. It's gonna be a good one. All-star stuff to talk about this week, man. I'm excited, bro.
Yeah, just the focus for this week's show is going to be about the selections for NBA All-Star. Obviously, people are pretty much keeping their eyes tuned and aware with the upcoming changes and the way that the NBA All-Star game or All-Star game / tourney is going to be played. I wonder what kind of name they're going to really come up with that. But I think the most important aspect of this show is just the conversation about who's been selected to be a part of this year's NBA All-Star. You know, and I know where my sentiments lie. I'm a firm believer that it's more than about, you know, the weekend itself and saying players is you know, being part of playing an NBA All-Star game. I'm more about the mindset of this person's performance. If we're, you know, basically depicting through the course of the first game of the season all the way up until whatever they deem as the cutoff point, what their performance reflects is indicative of being an all-star, right? And even if you're on a losing, you have a player who is performing at a high level, one that is comparable to their contemporaries, and they're being, you know, lauded and applauded as being considered as an all-star, why doesn't that person have that same kind of consideration? And we've seen the waffling back and forth with the way that the committee determines it, what we use to kind of gauge that between fan votership and the the coaches and ultimately the peers and the percentages that deem that as everything like that. But I'm just of the mindset that for us to make sure that we're highlighting all of the guys who are doing remarkable work through the course of the first half of the season, you should be considered as an all-star, whether you're participating in a game that clearly most of these players are not putting 100% effort into or not. I think they should still be considered as all-stars.
I'll agree with the sentiment in terms of the aspect of talent and what a lot of these players mean to the overall product of the league. So it can't always be encapsulated by the 30 guys, if you will, or whatever number it is that gets ultimately selected, you know, for this. I guess it's not 30. Is it 24? So that part of it too, and that's something that people always consider is like, hey, well, should there just be more guys added to the proverbial aspect? Because it doesn't really matter anyway. But you know, some of those folks, they like the designation. Some of them, like, you know what, I'd rather prefer the extra days off. And as always, I think we live in a society where sometimes players and fans want it kind of both ways. But I think from a talent perspective, there's always more than the selected all-stars. So it'd be an interesting way to kind of designate what that ultimately means for the league as it pushes forward.
Absolutely. So we're going to get into some of the reserves selections for the all-stars from both the East and the West. Predictions. I'm sorry. Yes. We are opening up the crystal ball. Warrenshaw Swami and Cal Copperfield is on it, right? So we'll be opening up our collective prediction hats of who we think is going to be selected for the East and West. As always, be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at Game Face Lead, the show's Twitter handle NBA Baseline, available on the major platforms. You can go to www.thebaselinenba.com to not only check this episode, but also all of the shows that we archive for your listening pleasure. And if you rock with us on the YouTube channel, we say hello to you. And you see the blue and white logo, that means that we are with the 19 Media Group family. 19 Media Group, you running these content streets. So be sure to go to www.19mediagroup.com to not only check us, but the family of great content creators that are out there in the 19 Media Group space, giving you what you like to listen to. A little bit of everything for your listening pleasure. So, Shaw, before we begin, we got to make sure we pay some bills. And the best way to pay bills, my man, is through our peoples over at Prizepicks. That's right. The big game is almost here, and it's now or never. Do not miss out on the last football game of the season with Prizepicks, the best place to win cash while watching the big game. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prizepicks is also giving away a free pick for the big game, where one of the starting quarterbacks will only need 1 yard to win. If you're correct on at least one or more stat projections, you can win real cash. Check out the promos tab to tail any of our super sweet Millie winners big game lineups. If you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of $1 million in promo funds. Will Patrick Mahomes pass for more than 1.5 TDs? Will Saquon Barkley rush for more than 95 yards? These are the types of picks I debate when playing Prizepicks. Just download the app and use the code CLNS, as Prizepicks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states, including California, Texas, Georgia, and Florida. Prizepicks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. With my picks, or when my picks hit, I can get money in as quick as 15 minutes. So remember, download the app today, use the code CLNS, that's Charlie, Lima, Nancy, Sam, to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prizepicks, run your game. Cal and I start talking about those East and West predictions on the reserves for All-Stars, so don't go anywhere. We're back, Callie Warrenshaw, Baseline NBA Podcast. Time to discuss NBA All-Star reserves, and it's time for us to open up our crystal ball. You like that? I wish
I do. Yeah, illumination.
Exactly.
Call you, Mysterio in this piece.
So, Shaw, while I illuminate, you can pontificate, right? So, all right. So here we go, man. Let's talk about it. We'll start with the Eastern Conference, because when the East is in the house, oh my gosh, right?
Danger.
Who do we have tabbed to be part of the All-Star reserve lineup for this year's NBA All-Star extravaganza?
Sure, I love that, man. You were with the words play today.
Just so you know,
I got you.
Either that or I drank a really good Malbec and I'm still buzzing off that. So.
Still buzzing. Well, for those following at home, the NBA All-Star reserves have yet to be announced as recording of this show, and it goes by the aspect of, hey, you need 2 guards, 3 front court players, and 2 wild cards. So those wild cards can be, basically exactly that, anybody, a guard or a front court player. So my selections are a little bit, it's a hybrid of what I think the fans want, kind of what I want, and kind of old school methodology in terms of thinking, like, how much do you reward winning and how much do you reward a team that, should just have a certain all-star and certain presence there, versus the fans just want to see this individual. So there'll be some pretty significant snubs on both sides for the East and West for me. But to just kind of rattle off, the first 2 guys in at the guard spots I have for me are Darius Garland and Cade Cunningham. I think Cleveland is going to need at least 2 representatives on this for just how they've kind of ran away with the Eastern Conference up to this point. And Garland has been just as important as Donovan Mitchell, I think, to this stage. And Cade Cunningham, we've talked about basically in the last 3 episodes of how he's leading that Detroit team. Jaylen Brown, I think it's kind of a no-brainer at one of the front court spots. And then the last 2 front court spots for me are a little dicey. Pascal Siakam, I think, is deserving because the Pacers have started to make a run. He's been better than Haliburton all season long, in my personal opinion. But then Franz Wagner from Orlando, I think the Magic deserve a representative. But then there's the aspect, has Franz played enough games, as we're recording 28 of their 45 games. So that might be a hindrance. But I'm going to go with him because I think Orlando's been a great story, and he was really lighting the world on fire for, more games than even Paulo has been able to play through the course of this year. And then my final 2, in terms of the wild cards, I think Trae Young from what Orlando's been able to do. And then LaMelo Ball, who was actually the fans' pick to start in the game. And I understand he's on a losing team, but I think if you're looking for that flair and that excitement, his game is suited for All-Star. So those are my 7 guys. Obviously, there's some guys I left off, but love to kind of throw it to you, brother, to kind of see where you stand on this.
So I kind of like where your selections are. I personally feel, Pascal Siakam is really the reason why the Indiana Pacers are even I guess, salvaging what would be considered as a very disappointing season, or giving people the perceptions that they've
Well, they
overachieved?
turned it around, but
No,
he's
they've
been the
turned
most
it around.
consistent all year long for sure.
He's the most consistent, but I could argue that he arguably is really the best, the best player, because Tyrese Haliburton has just absolutely struggled this year. There's no getting around it. He's been so up and down, and yet for where his position is, what his role is, and the way that their offense has been set up. I don't want to belabor the point about this, but I'm just saying that I think there's some players who you can clearly tell they're going to be impacted because of the style of play that the teams are currently on, what they have been contributing to, and it's going to look beyond the numbers to determine whether or not they're going to actually be snubbed or deserving. And that's the reason why I focus right in on Pascal Siakam right now, because he's one of those guys, Shaw, who's always kind of benefited from having a much more stable backcourt lineup that has allowed him to produce the way that he produces. But I think from Jump Street, his level of consistency has far surpassed a lot of what we're talking about from the other guys that you've selected, in the Darius Garlands, the Cade Cunninghams. All of these guys are primary ball handlers, right? And in many ways have reflected being kind of like the floor generals that have not just set up success for their other role players, but for themselves have been able to put up really great statistics. Pascal Siakam, Franz Wagner, I think, was compromised more so the fact that, his injury at the time that he showed you peak Franz, right, would have probably made him an easy get. So I don't see him necessarily being snubbed, because I think now that they've got Paolo Banchero that there is that tandem combination has been identifiable with the Orlando Magic. And then you look again with the Trae Young and LaMelo Ball, again, floor generals, right? Like, who have gone like nuts crazy and have elevated their teams in some respects. I mean, minus the Charlotte Hornets, who have struggled. But LaMelo Ball, he's must-see TV, and I'm sure fans would love to see him out there on the basketball court. If nothing else, they'd love to see his brother probably do, the halftime show. So all that being said, I don't snub any of the guys that you have mentioned. I think the one person who I'd be very much on the fence with is probably Pascal Siakam, because I'm sure that they're going to probably do some politics on that aspect of it.
That's interesting. I think the one I'm most dubious about or scared about is Franz, just because of the games played. And I think there's this tendency, because remember, these are the coaches' selections, so they have some preferential treatment to guys that they like. So I think a guy like Evan Mobley, because he's shown some strides and Cleveland's been so good. I don't know that Cleveland needs 3 all-stars. I just don't know that that's really the case. And if Mobley's quite that good just yet, but I wouldn't hate it. And I think the other guy too, when you're talking about at that forward spot, is Zach LaVine potentially, if you want to qualify him as that. But then the old adage of Bam Adebayo, and Adebayo's had a down year, but coaches love that guy. I mean, there's a lot to love, but I think there's just someone like, sometimes they just kind of rubber stamp guys in. But Bam is probably more likely to get the All-Star nod than Franz is, although I don't think statistically it would make a lot of sense.
Hence the quandary, right, Shaw? Because again, what is going to tip the scale in order to favor one, or if not any of these players, to get in at the expense of somebody else who probably is as equally deserving? To your point, when you say down year by what we have previously come to expect from Bam Adebayo, because every year should be incrementally better than the year previous, given the way that team has been structured, given the circumstances, which again speaks more to what those other contributions are that Bam probably makes for this Miami Heat team, if not for them to still be even in playing contention, right? At times. So that's the part that's really kind of disturbing, is the fact that we're not gonna count that. We're relying on the head coaches who will have a say in this to look at that, and they probably are determining that a whole lot more than the popularity aspect of what a player is basically doing. So, I'm just more curious, again, where that line, or what those factors are, and who's actually levying those factors more so for the type of players, because typically it's an even keel thing when we look at the performances from some of these players and how they operate. But this year, it's been kind of noticeable, and I think part of it too is because of the fact that we have a lot of new head coaches, right, that are representing in the Eastern Conference, that I think are having an impact on us being introduced to some of these players who are now getting an opportunity to really shine. So that it's kind of the one person that I'm really curious about, Shaw, and you mentioned Jaylen Brown. Is it just me, or as as great as a season as I think we're saying that Jaylen Brown is having, it's still yet a relatively quiet season, maybe because we expected him to be a starter alongside of Jason Tatum.
To some degree, I think he hasn't been as, I don't want to say not as impactful, but it's just, it feels different. But it's the same thing with Bam. It feels different, and the numbers, I think, even reflecting that for both of those guys. But I think with Boston still, despite how mediocre they've been over the last month and change of the season, they still sit in the second seed in the Eastern Conference. The pedigree, and that's where it kind of like, hey, well, this is something that I don't say you're rubber stamping Jaylen Brown in, but the Celtics still deserve 2 All-Stars based on kind of their importance to the league, being the defending champions, and their current actual league standings, at this stage of the season. So real quick, though, I want to just kind of highlight my snubs, because there's going to be a lot of people like, no Damian Lillard, and how can you not put Dame in? Because
yeah. Exactly. Right. No, I mean, and to the point, Shaw, again, is what Damian Lillard doing considered all-star worthy for this season, right? You look at his numbers, right? Damian Lillard is posting some pretty good numbers. But then again, are you comparing that to the level of what the Jalen Brunsons are doing and even the Darius Garlands are doing, and saying, yeah, he's just not all-star worthy enough to be in this, to be a part of this list. And that's where I tend to, because he's putting together some really good numbers, and the Milwaukee Bucks are still a top 4 team in the Eastern Conference. So how does that not resonate?
Well, remember, this is me speaking, right? So
I understand.
if you want what I think the coaches are going to actually do, I think a guy like Bam or Evan Mobley gets in over Wagner, and I think Dame gets in over LaMelo Ball from my picks, because I think that's just the coaches like, hey, these are the guys we know, they're tried and true, we love the way they play, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what they'll kind of rubber stamp.
I was trying to draw out, you know what I'm saying, alter ego Shaw, like, you know what I'm saying, the other side of Shaw, that's Cal Shaw. You know what I'm saying? I was trying to draw that out. I wanted to see where on the line you wanted to be at with this whole thing. But I understand you're laying out a level of, that's why I call you the diplomat, because you're laying out a level of diplomacy where it's just like, don't get mad yet, don't break out the tiki torches just yet, start burning effigies.
And these are my picks. I'm standing on my own business, but I also understand the politics of the NBA. So if I was a coach and had a spot, those are the guys who I'd go with. But I know that for the most part, the coaches like chalk. They like, hey, we like the same guys. We like who we like. And LaMelo's ball is not aesthetically pleasing for a lot of folks, and they just feel like he's chucking. But I think the fans, he was a leading vote getter by the fan standpoint in the East Guard. So the fans want to see him there. But I don't know if the coaches will actually go with my selection. That's why I think a guy like Dame probably gets in. But again, I snubbed Mobley. I snubbed Dame. I snubbed Tyrese Maxey and Tyler Hero to a lesser degree as well. So those are the main guys that are not on my list that, might be in the running for one of these spots as we're discussing.
Yeah, I think the one person who I think I would have been on the fence. So like, let's maybe look at guys that we would say on the fence. I say Tyrese Maxey is certainly on the fence, simply because I don't think that he was prepared to shoulder the load as much as he has, and especially as well too with the presence of Paul George. Again, this is why I was not completely. I'm not saying this, as it pertains to, this was about Tyrese Maxey being an all-star. What I was alluding more to was, is Tyrese Maxey prepared to be the, say, Jalen Brunson of the team, where he can continue to elevate and score the basketball the way that he does while setting up Joel Embiid and Paul George for success? And unfortunately, the injuries that Paul George and Joel Embiid have suffered have marginalized his ability to be a really quality floor general. Because while he's doing it now with role players, which, you can make the argument, man, that's tough sledding for a kid that, clearly is on the uptick. I think that's what's going to wind up hurting him, and it's going to put him on the fence, because he did get injured himself as well too, and has kind of struggled as far as shooting the basketball goes. A lot of that is because it's an inherent bad situation, so to speak, because he's not been able to work with the true, team that he was supposed to be working with for us to really gauge and see, is he that guy? I still think that he is, but I just don't think that this will be the year that he winds up getting in.
Yeah, and I think that has to be okay, especially given their record. Yes, he's played 37 games, and he's been there, for a good majority of what they've done, and he's he's on a terrific tear as we're even discussing it right now. He's over 28 points per game for the last, I think, 10 games in a row or something like that, or whatever. He's averaging, I think, 28 points something for the season. He's really hooping, but carrying a load that he just shouldn't be carrying, I think, with the help that was supposed to be in tow for Philadelphia. So maybe next year, my guy. Maybe next year.
The one person I will say, Shaw, that I know you hadn't made mention of, but I kind of want to make sure I give him his flowers too. And it really sucks because, again, the formatting, I don't want to keep get on my soapbox again. But Josh Hart, what can we say about this guy? How do we not find a way for this guy to not be considered all-star worthy or all-star? Again, I know that we give credence to players because for the team, he is such a valuable person. But I think it also resonates with that same type of value when you have a team as successful as the New York Knicks. I'm not saying you got to have 3 guys in there. And clearly, Karl-Anthony Towns and Jalen Brunson are those dudes. You get what I'm saying? But when you look at what Josh Hart is especially doing for his position, his role, I know that we're saying, when we talk about 6th man of the year, these are the kind of things that I think resonate with a guy being considered 6th man of the year. And him to do that all year long, how is that not considered, all-star worthy? You know what I mean? Again, we may have to redefine what this is supposed to mean. But in the end, I'm just more, concerned that we're not giving enough credit to some of these particular, players who are doing that kind of work that I just considered would be all-star worthy.
Yeah, Josh Hart is an all-star in my mind. I think if you go to your opening monologue about what this rod probably really means, but is his game something that people want to see, on the bright lights of San Francisco or wherever all-star is in that particular year. But his talent level, what he means to this team, what he does as terms of he's probably the epitome of a glue guy, Mr. Intangibles, does whatever it takes to win. I'm a big Josh Hart fan, as you know, so I'd be over the moon if he were able to get an all-star nod as a result of it. I just don't think that's where this is going to trend for, despite how well he's played this year in that starting role that a lot of people weren't sure if he was going to start as much as he did this year, but he's been able to do that. And, whatever it is, I think 8 triple doubles this season or something crazy. He's hooping, man. What a great call there.
Absolutely, man. But just so people understand, just so our listeners understand, that's why we have this platform, because we want to make sure we call out our peoples who deserve to have that opportunity, that chance. So there you go, Josh Hart. You know what I'm saying? And by all means, this is just shameless promotion. Josh, feel free to jump on our show anytime. You know what I'm saying? If you need to call out the powers that be to let them know you should be out there. You know what I'm saying? Hooping with your fellow brothers, because you're on all-star status. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Coming up, we'll shift our focus to the Western Conference and who we're predicting is going to step in to that possible all-star reserve role and who's a possible snubs. But first, hey, everybody, it's that time of the year, man. It's that time to get your ultimate fix on the NBA with NBA League Pass. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's awesome because you're craving for that nonstop hoops action. And now that we're getting on the back end of the NFL with Super Bowl and all this other kind of stuff, your focus and your attention has to be on watching everything basketball. And what better way to do that is with NBA League Pass. NBA League Pass is your ticket to the ultimate basketball experience. Enjoy live games, on-demand replays, and exclusive behind-the-scenes content across a variety of devices. With NBA League Pass, you'll get more games. We're talking regular season and select playoff matchups, more features, including multi-view angles, in-depth stats, and behind-the-scenes stories. More access. Catch your favorite teams and players anytime, anywhere. Stay up with the NBA like The Baseline does. League Pass is for fans who live the game. Sign up now and type @link.nba.com/LP19MG. That's @link.nba.com/LP19MG. NBA League Pass, baby. Get more of what you're bargaining for. More Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw. Don't go anywhere. All right, we're back. Callie Warrenshaw, Baseline NBA podcast. Time for us to shift our attention now to the Western Conference. We're going to try to predict who we think are going to be the reserve players for the West. Just to give a little bit of background now, Shaw, the Western Conference starters, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, LeBron James, and Nikola Jokic. I found this to be a more fascinating starting lineup because it pretty much, with the exception of maybe Kevin Durant, but what it pretty much speaks to is, this seems a little bit right, and maybe Steph Curry. I think Steph Curry's had somewhat of a down year in comparison to what his previous years are. And where the Golden State Warriors are, clearly there's been a lot of struggles. Even though he's the best player on that team. It's interesting, Shaw, though, because now you start focusing on the reserves. Do you find, or do you think that there's an easier path forward to determining how the West reserves will be predicted?
I think it's a little bit more difficult because there's so much variance between, especially after you get past OKC, and then all those other teams are starting to kind of bunch up together, and we have some surprise teams in here. Without giving it away just yet, but to answer your question, is like, what do you do with a team like Houston? What do you do with a team kind of like Memphis? Like Ja is an all-star, but has he played enough games? Those are the kinds of conversations that make it really tough when it comes to the Western Conference. And then when you had those legends, those luminaries, if you will, of Steph, KD, and LeBron, like, all right, like they just kind of have to be in the starting lineup because this is who we know. This is who we love. This is the generation of the NBA that many of the fan groups of today, that's who they've grown up with. So the West is very, very difficult and makes for some intriguing conversation because there's more snubs. There's more guys with the talent level that probably, again, should qualify, but there's just not enough spots, when you take into all the variables that you need to take into consideration when selecting.
I agree, but I'm going to push back a little bit. I think it might be a little bit more clearer just because of the level of injuries that a lot of the star players have suffered. I just think maybe we're afraid to pull the trigger on saying this guy is worthy of being an all-star. And because, again, what are we looking at? Are we looking at their overall body of work, comparing what they've did in previous years to what they're showing you now? And if it measures somewhere close in that range, he's still deserving? Or are we just saying that, like, look, man, there are other guys who've put in more games, more effort and time. Their teams are clearly a little bit more successful. Why not go ahead and say that person's deserving? Look, for example, I'm not afraid to say that a guy like Jalen Green should be deserving of an all-star if he clearly is showing you he's one of the more exciting players and his numbers have incrementally better. And he's attributed to the Houston Rockets being one of the best teams in the Western Conference. But again, when you compare his numbers to, say, the ones have always get put in that conversation, are those numbers comparable? Are those numbers considered all-star worthy? I don't think the question would be had if Ja Morant had enough games under his belt, but I would not be afraid to pick him over, say, Ja Morant if Ja Morant hasn't played enough games, even though when he's on the court, he could arguably be, all-star worthy in the blink of a hat. But outside of that, I would not snub a guy like Jalen Green for being available because they say the best ability is your availability. And some of these guys clearly just haven't been available, and that's okay. Ja Morant's going to be all-star for like 15 times over, twice on Sunday, whenever we feel like it. It's just, he's not in a position to have that say per se, even though I know we would want him to.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a matter of perspective. So I think without, delaying it, as you outlined the starters for this, my selections, if it were me picking, I have Anthony Edwards and De'Aaron Fox at the guard spots. Fox is is the shakiest of my selections here. The Kings have really kind of come on here in the last two. And then again, it's always the issue of, do you need two Kings and between Fox and Sabonis? But because of some of my front court selections, Sabonis does not get on there, spoiler alert. So I got Edwards and Fox. I got Wemby as the runaway guy, in terms of who needs to be on there in the front court spot. And then because of the job factor in Memphis, Jaren Jackson has been the most consistent and most available, for them, averaging 23 a game. He's never been a plus rebounder, but 6.5 rebounds, getting a block and a steal. Like, he's been really important to what Memphis has done and has been there. Anthony Davis, I think, speaks kind of for itself. And then my wild cards get into that aspect of what we're talking about a little bit in the Eastern Conference a little while ago. I think the Rockets deserve a guy. It's interesting that you went with Jalen Green. I'm going with Şengün. I think as the clear-cut guy there.
Absolutely. Best player. No question.
Yeah, who makes sense for them. So he fits my first wild card spot. And then the aspect of OKC just really bludgeoning the rest of the Western Conference. I think they need a second guy. And then that's where my guy Jalen Williams gets on here too. But he's shaky. Because I think he's had moments. He's averaging over 20 a game. Like, counting stats are there. But there is a lot of talent in the Western Conference that I'm now omitting as a result, especially when you're thinking about it from a wildcard spot. So that leaves me with no Kyrie, that leaves me with no Sabonis, and some other big names out there in the Western Conference. James Harden and what the Clippers are doing. Like, it feels hard, but
that one I'm a little surprised by. I'm not saying that you're not pro James Harden. I'm just saying I am a little surprised that you wouldn't go with James Harden, because by all accounts, James Harden availability and his numbers are really not that shabby. Again, when you put it in comparison to the other people that are playing in his position, like I can make the argument that James Harden probably should be a starter over Steph Curry, but not saying that Steph Curry's numbers are not, commendable. They're great. But again, in the landscape of what you're seeing from what he's been currently doing performance-wise, and again, this is all the way up going to the NBA going up to NBA All-Star Weekend. I'm just saying that like Harden has, puts up some pretty gaudy numbers, monster numbers, and the Clippers are still hanging around. If not a starter, I would see him more so as clearly as a reserve. I would think that Clippers should at least have one.
Yeah, you know what? And I
You
don't
might go Zubac. You might go, hey.
Yeah, I like Zoo as well too. I think he's been severely underrated his entire career, but this season he's really stepped into it. So I think, again, not to split hairs, but the Clippers are doing better than Sacramento is for the majority part of the season, and even up to this point. So if you would have said Harden makes it in over Fox and Fox ends up getting snubbed, then I can't really be mad at that. But that means Fox and Sabonis don't get on the team. And I feel like for what they both contribute, that's hard. And I think with the Clippers, I love what Harden is doing. Zoo's been amazing. I think Ty Lue deserves as much credit for the Clippers' success as anybody else does as well too. But I can't fight you on the Harden thing. Again, if you wanted to sub out Fox for Harden, I would say, hey, by all means, just understanding that neither king would actually get on the roster.
Well, I hate to say this because I know you'd fight me on this. I would rather see Sabonis in there before Fox, right? And again, this is why I don't like the idea of two front court or three front court, two guard. Like I don't care for that. Like you're an all-star, you're an all-star. Get rid of the front court. It
should be really all wild cards, really. Yeah,
exactly. So as far as I'm concerned, I just thought that Sabonis's play while De'Aaron Fox was going through his struggles, right? And it doesn't matter if
hold on. So because I'm not going to fight you on the Fox or Sabonis thing. One of those guys is interchangeable for me, and then even the aspect of Harden over Fox. But like I said, they both can't get on. But what I do want to question you on then, because where I have trouble is the Jalen Williams thing. So do you believe that two Thunder guys should be on there? Because then that's a spot.
I think Jalen Williams
Sabonis could get on there instead of Williams.
I think Jalen Williams is having an awesome year. Awesome. Okay. And
do you think he's having a more awesome year than Sabonis or Fox?
I think let me put it like this. I think he's having a more awesome year than Jaren Jackson Jr. I'm not saying that Jaren Jackson Jr. shouldn't be in consideration. Jaren Jackson Jr. is really playing well. But I think from a defensive perspective, and I think defense still should count for something. Jaren Jackson Jr. has not nearly been as contributory from the defensive side of things as much as he's been to the offensive side of things. I'm looking at the overall game. Jalen Williams, by leaps and bounds, is responsible for the Oklahoma City Thunder being one of the top 3 teams defensively because of his absolute versatility and the ability to score that basketball, being that second guy to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So if we're up to me, no question, Jalen Williams getting it. The person I think I was going to be on the fence with a little bit more so was Jaren Jackson Jr. because of the fact that he got injured. And when he's come back, no doubt he is the second best. And I think at times, arguably, he's one of the best scorers on that team while Josh still gets his legs underneath him. But defensively, I don't see nearly as much of the contributions that he makes that he was doing in previous years. And that's easily why I would put Victor Wembanyama in there, and I would easily put Anthony Davis in there, no question. The person I think I would have been on the fence about has been Jaren Jackson about that. But again, I wouldn't be mad if he doesn't get in, but I wouldn't be like all up in arms if he gets in and say the guys I'm talking about don't get in because of it.
Well, I mean, that's tough. I mean, the Grizzlies are 5th in defensive rating this year. He is their anchor of that defense. He has the best defensive rating on their team, averaging a steal and a half, and a block and a half.
I guess to your point, you got me. I guess to your point, this is why you're saying that it is a much tougher path to delineate who's going to come in as the reserves.
Yeah,
I get.
I
will concede to that point on that one, Shaw, just simply because of the guys that we're highlighting in that conversation, that discussion for. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, you just start to interweave, the conversation. It's like, all right, well, this guy, do you value this? Do you want that or whatever? We haven't even talked about Devin Booker. I mean, yes, the Phoenix Suns have been, a disappointment, but I mean,
Well,
Devin Booker is obviously.
Do you think? I think it's the injury, but do you think that Kevin Durant should be a starter over Devin Booker?
No, I don't think. I think Wemby should have gotten that spot, and Durant is still an all-star. But
right.
Again, this is the combination of the fans, the coaches, and the players who make that determination. So KD legacy wise kind of gets in, but I think Wemby has been more available, and should have started alongside Joker and LeBron, this year. But again, Kevin Durant's had an amazing season, so.
Look, and I'm not taking anything away from it. Again, all-star worthy, right? Yeah. And I guess if all-star starters, right? Like, is he considered? Should it be considered all-star starter? And you know what it is, Shaw? I think when we got away from the position, right? Now that we're in this era of positionless basketball, we're just lumping together the skill sets of all of these players, and then I guess just maybe looking at these numbers and analytics and just saying, okay. And then I think the outlier is, what do the fans think? Here, let me give you some crumbs to that. But I think that's part of the reason where we've gotten away from putting the onus on fans doing their due diligence in order for them to really appreciate what those numbers are supposed to mean as it compares to what the players are actually doing on that basketball court, not just for their teams, but also for the conference in and of itself among their contemporaries. Because I agree with you. I don't see in a world where it makes sense that Victor Wembanyama should not be considered a starter, even though it's because the San Antonio Spurs are not a top 5 team in the Western Conference. Makes absolutely no sense. Some 15, 20 years ago, would we have been having the same kind of conversations when you had the San Antonio Spurs that had David Robinson and Tim Duncan?
Yeah, I agree. I think once we get out of, and I say this with a certain grain of salt, once we get out of the LeBron, Curry, KD era, it's going to be probably Wemby as a leading vote getter, I think, as an heir apparent. Anthony Edwards could come close in terms of the fan popularity vote. Like, a lot of people like Ant-Man, and a lot of people are just going to be forced to learn and understand the greatness of Wemby. I think those two guys have the inside track once those other guys are out of the way to lead in vote getting. Doesn't mean that they'll deserve it every year, but they're going to command the popular potential vote. One last guy I want to talk about. Your thoughts on Kyrie Irving? 25, 5 and 5, basically over 40% from the 3-point line, just under 50% from the floor. The Mavs, yes, haven't been what they wanted to be, and Luka been out, obviously impacts that. But your thoughts on Kyrie not making my list, or would you have Kyrie somewhere on this all-star team reserve?
I think Kyrie goes in even before De'Aaron Fox. Quite honestly, to me. I'm sorry. Like, I am not saying that De'Aaron Fox's numbers are not comparable and are not worthy of, and I think it's certainly helped him that the Sacramento Kings have turned things around since the firing of Mike Brown. But when I look at what Kyrie Irving has been able to do so far this year, his level of availability, the fact that he's literally had to shoulder this team while Doncic has been on the mend, and arguably would this conversation change somewhat if Doncic and was a part of this roster and the Dallas Mavericks, say, had more like 10 more wins than what they currently have right now? Would we be arguing about that? I'm just looking at this and I'm saying Kyrie Irving should be an all-star, no question. I whether you just started him or you put him on the reserves, this is one of the few years that even I'm not even just looking at his numbers specifically, but just looking at what his overall game in totality, what the numbers translate to, I think it would be worthy of such. Now, in a situation where it's absolutely flooded with guard play of everyone playing out their minds, yeah, I wouldn't be upset or mad about it. But again, this is a scenario where my mindset is, if everything was all wild card worthy, there would be certain guys that I just think, given what they're doing so far this season, would usurp it. I'm not going to be mad if Kyrie doesn't get in, but I'd be sorely disappointed because I do think what he's doing, it should be worthy of it.
Well, you brought up a great point that I will relent to, because if I think even conventional wisdom, so while I put Fox on my reserve, I think the political structure of this is going to keep Fox off of this. So that makes room for Harden or Kyrie to kind of get on, because you mentioned Mike Brown. the coaches are making these selections. Who have been the loudest people once Brown was fired to come to Brown's defense? It was basically every single coach around the league. And if they think even a hint that Fox had something to do with that, and he did, let's keep it a buck, that would probably hurt his chances to be selected now as a reserve by the majority of the coaches. So that probably lends for more of a Kyrie or Harden situation to kind of get in. And then we would see then if Fox or Sabonis gets in as some semblance of a wild card selection. But that's why I'm interested to see, because do the coaches feel like the Rockets need representation? Because then Şengün doesn't get in, then you can put, all these other guys we've been talking about. The West is going to be really interesting to watch. So yeah, I didn't have an easy time with this at all.
Yeah, the West I think is going to be interesting to watch, and I think the West is going to have a lot more. Is going to have a lot more treading. You know what I'm saying, for us to really kind of look at and understand when it gets released. To your point, the Eastern Conference, maybe from a perspective of decisions, it would have been a little bit easier, but I think there's not nearly as many players that you would have to be arguing with to determine whether they are or are not worthy. I think you could just probably say the East allows you to kind of have more conversations of the current state. But I think the West definitely challenges exactly what we're talking about in what this is supposed to mean. And again, I'll go back to this. I want a person who's being acknowledged as an all-star to mean something if we keep talking about it and we keep putting it as part of these accolades that we're giving credence to a player and their legacy, and whether or not it's factored into whether or not they make it to the Hall of Fame and stuff like that. If that's not going to be the case, if we're going to basically, go by, changing the discussion and narrative so much about this, I think it lessens it. And then I think at some point we got to be like, okay, he's all-star. Great. Wonderful. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know what that's supposed to mean, but that's nice. In this situation, because we have these conversations, Shaw, it definitely forces us to challenge the status quo about why there should be a significance in making these guys, all-stars, and what that criteria really needs to be, so that we're not sitting here fighting with the idea that the numbers that some of these guys are actually doing, especially in the Western Conference, are just being marginalized because we don't know what comparison we're supposed to use or what determination needs to be made to say that they are deserving to be called as such. It's weird because we have all NBA, and I feel like at times all NBA seems to resonate more with players than it does about them being considered all-stars.
Yeah. There's a lot of nuance to the way a lot of this is being decided. And so without the parameters in place, it lends to these consistent debates and conversations literally each year, because we're all clamoring like, all right, well, we want to define criteria. And then we got some defined criteria last year for NBA, end of season awards, and like, we don't like that. No, it's too hard. So again, I don't know if we'll ever really be happy, but this continues to give us some great content here on the Baseline and all the other shows and podcasts and media that cover the league, throughout its years, man. This is a wild situation that I don't know if there's an end insight into how it will actually be solved.
Absolutely, man. Well, per usual, another great show, another great topics of conversation and discussions. And yeah, we want to know from you guys, who do you think will be snubbed, right? Who do you see as being on the outs for this year's upcoming NBA All-Star extravaganza, right? Like, and will you go to the mat to say that they are deserving as such? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'd love to see that, man. That's what they call a proactivization.
Love it.
Once again, man, we'd like to thank you and yours for hopping on board with us for the Baseline. Callie, Warren, Shaw, we appreciate you guys. We do, and we'll catch up with you next time.